Hello. Today we are doing the next chapter, chapter 19, in fact. I'm very excited about this one. Very excited. So let us begin. Chapter 19, Flight of the Varangian. Fitbjorn was drunk. The bodies were cleared out of the long sail, and the barrels of mead had been returned. With the reinstallation of Zoe as the head of the empire, everything felt right again. The Varangian met together frequently in their celebrations of the events, and often at the Longsail or Kenapos, or even at the barracks. In the months since the overthrow of the emperor, much had happened. The empress was put back to the throne. The Varangian were held in their great esteem again, and the former emperor, the fifth, died in a monastery, probably of his wounds. It was only in June that Harold finally had the time to meet with his men, and he came to the Longsail, where many gathered daily. Fitbjorn had one of the serving women on his lap, and he leaned back and drank his heart's content away. His mood had certainly soured when Harold walked in, but none seemed to notice. He tried to listen to the story that Niels was telling, but something about the place didn't feel right anymore. He considered leaving. My brave Varangian, I come to you finally, a much richer man than even last I saw you all. Last I saw you was just as you were freed from prison, Fitbjorn said, and many laughed. Harold, though, looked at Fitbjorn with a look of understanding. I know you do not like me, that look said. That is true. That is true. I have also been paid by the Empress. The Palutasvarf has been made for me again. The what? Asked Sven. I am so glad you have asked, Harold said to laughter. It is the heathen tongue for the palace plunder. I have been allowed to make a claim to the riches of Michael the Fifth. This marks the third time I have had the Palutasvarf. He spoke the word with such enthusiasm that it was clear he rather enjoyed it. But I would not be here today were it not for you, my brave Varangian warriors. Sven, White Bear, Niels, Eifort, Inga, and Hafald, the most beautiful and the most strong. Hail, said Eric, raising a cup to them. Hail, came a response of many to their prowess. It is always my beauty that is mentioned, Inga said loudly, because my beauty is nothing to talk, nothing to drink to. All laughed with Hafvald. And so now we'll what? Keep it this rating here in the east? Asked Fitbjorn. No. From here I want to return north. I have earned much wealth here, and I am ready to make my claim on the lands that were taken from me. Fitbjorn stood, the woman who sat on his lap shuffling off with an indignant look. He cracked his neck. Then to the north we must go, and win for ourselves this kingdom you promise, Fitbjorn said. Harold looked at the woman he'd displaced from her seat with his standing. Come here then, my love, Harold said, beckoning the woman over. She went to him and sat. Harold placed his hand on her thigh and relaxed back. I meet with the Empress tonight. I shall ask a formal release that we may go. I'll also request fund for the trip. Surely there is much owed to me within my sailing warriors. The Skald Thjaldorfer then stood and put a hand onto Fitbjorn's shoulder. He raised his cup and took in the room, quieting all. That is all well, he started. Now it has been too long that I have not heard, and I must know. Lord, how did you escape that cell? We arrived to free you, and you walked down the street from behind us. You cannot keep saying that to trust this miracle of King Olaf. I have to know what to put into the story. Thjoldarfur then sat in Fitbjorn's seat. Taking the cue and not wanting any more attention laid on him then, Fitbjorn sat heavily on the table, and it groaned at his weight. Ah, yes. That I can tell you now. Haldor and Ulf, of course, were with me. Weren't you, boys? Aye, they both said together. That's right. And they both of them will tell the truth of the story. You know well that the tower had only the one door that opened to the street, but there was also a window high on the wall side. You see, my friends, my captivity was always a protected place, for St. Olaf watched over me. In the night, we heard a scraping and looked to see a rope being thrown down to us from the window. There was a noble-born woman there and her servants who used a ladder to climb to the window and throw to us the rope. You see, she told me the story after. She had been sick and had her illness cleansed by Olaf himself. He then appeared to her in a vision, much like he did me, and asked her to deliver his brother, me. Then it was I came to find you, and you were all roused from your seats and received me with joy. He looked with great self-satisfaction. The men Ulf and Haldar nodded along, though their enthusiasm seemed somewhat diminished. They both drank and smiled in a near placating manner. Aye, as he says, Harold grinned at them both. We three were saved by love of my brother, my half-brother. I am sure this miracle of King Olaf will be recorded and well known throughout the lands like that of Saul's vision. For tonight and these days, though there is little to do but drink and be joyed for the gracious gifts we are due from the Empress and the court. Once again, I have the favor and influence I once enjoyed. It is the highest place now. What were you arrested for? Asked Ulf. I was arrested for being there with you and Haldor the same, but even when in the cell, you knew not what the charge was. Have you learned since? Did the Emperors tell you? Harold laughed. I think you all know what I was in that prison for. I think you all have guessed. He paused dramatically. No? Well, let me tell you. The true reason, it was because of my friendship with the last emperor. He grew solemn. Michael the Fourth. Aye, good man. A good emperor. He raised his cup. Friends, my fighting Varangian, pour out a sip now for that man. This drink I dedicate to the Emperor Michael the Fourth, the second of the three emperors. The second of three emperors I have known of this Byzantium, and my dear friend. He sits with the Lord Christ in heaven now, doubtless smiling on me and all of us for our actions in securing the city. Drink! Harold poured out a generous amount of his mead onto the floor, and the rest all followed in doing the same. The serving women each also had a cup and poured out similarly, though very few of them understood Norse, and they that did knew very little of that. Hail the Emperor! Boldly do we fight in his name, Eric said. Niels! Speak like a skald! Talk of this great man, prompted Olaf, all quieted in anticipation. Harold even turned with an appreciative smile on his face. A stronger king in this land there was none, whose power through Harold hard battles won. The man we knew so upright and not vulgar, who led out to revolting lands to burn the Bulgar. All laughed. The name Bulgar Burner had, of course, been attributed to Harold, but he didn't mind sharing the name. This great Byzantine, the great name was spread, and before whom these rebels all fled. Here we rest him and remember his end. A king we knew, to us a friend. Hail! Skål! They all shouted and poured out more to the great man that they'd all respected so well. Well done, Niels. You shall have to write some skaldic song for me. This thing I may do, Lord. But you already have so many working to write down your feats. Of course, can never have enough. Nothing is ever enough. I am most greedy for all things in life. It is only my nature, but that is all that has come of this Miklagard. I have earned my wealth and fame and power here, as I sought to. And so we leave? Asked Håkon. Precisely. The time to leave is now, when things are at their best here. We go to better condition in other land. Of course, the Varangian will continue even after I go. Those who'd come with me are welcome, and those who'd stay to keep winning riches will still be allowed. There is no end to the threat that lurks out in the seas, these Circlanders and their ever-presence, but put a stain to Christendom, and the Emperor will no doubt seek to fight them evermore. But that will not be my fate. I go to my destination in the north. God, he likes the sound of his own voice, Fitbjorn said. He turned back to his friends who sat at the table with him. Well, what will you do? Asked Harold's strong arm. What do you mean? Asked Hafvald. Will you go north with Harold, or will you keep raiding? I know what I will go, Olaf said. I have already a great hoard of wealth, and I am keen to go to collect what I have sent home to build my hall. It shall be grand. I would go with ye, Ragnar said. There's been much change in my homeland, and if there is a good chance I'd return to make certain things are all well as was left. I go where the story goes, Niels said. The tale of Harold is one I am learning to tell, and it is a grand tale, though mine also includes the feats of all these brave Varangian too. I think I too will go north, Fitbjorn said. I fear my fate is tied with this Lord Harold. I know not where I'll find it, though. I am of the same mind, Hafvald said. Not the destiny, but more that I am done with this politics of this place. These aren't my lands, or that of my ancestors. I'm tired of the conflict they make for themselves, and only do I crave war, but one that I can fight for my people. I think you, Niels paused, bore of a man, want to fight, want to kill. There is much in you, but its prevailing nature, there is the war. And you a story. Yes, we all know. I'd trust me more in a fight. Niels laughed. As would I, my friend. I pray the gods will not have to find out such result tonight, Fitbjorn said, his mood having been restored him with the end of Harold's attention. They carried on the rest of the night in Miklagard and shared joviality. Fitbjorn told story. Niels told story. Bodil surprised all by telling one of her own. All the while the candles burned and the mead was drunk in the Longsay. The next day, Fitbjorn awoke from a dream. Whatever it was about fled him as the full weight of wakefulness filled his awareness. He groaned and sat up, shaking his head and looking about. There were some few awake already, but many of the beds were still full of their occupants. Many of the beds lining the wall were full, with some few Varangians sitting on the ends. The door opened, and he turned to see the blinding light spilling in through from the outside world. He swung his lead over the side of the bed and stood, stretching in an enormous yawn. The man who'd opened the door was Harold himself. He'd come to the Varangian barrack and found many of them still rising from slumber. It was midday already, and they were not yet fully awake. Fitbjorn saw something of frustration upon his face as he breathed in through his nose and observed all in the dormitory. I hope you all slept well, he shouted and stepped in. It is time to rouse. How many are here now? What is the need for such panic? Fitbjorn asked quietly. Come, you two, awake! Those who to me show their fealty must now be ready to act. Those he kicked at were the large half-fouled and the relatively small Inga, who lay together as they always did. Lord, Ragnar said, what are you shouting about? Harold closed the door. This will have to be enough, he said, observing the long room. I have had my talking with the Empress. I asked to be allowed to leave the city to return north. He looked down, and she said no. The new Empress and this Constantine the Ninth will not let me go. He sighed, and a moment of quiet extended through the dark dormitory as they all processed the words. What? Asked Bodil. Why not? She said it was to help secure this city, and that is done already, I know. It is my thinking that she does not want to lose so great a fighting forces and commander in me. Whatever the reason, she will not permit leaving. The Varangian were all of them awake now and started to dress and ready themselves. Then he spoke slowly and controlled. There was an urgency. Though he spoke slowly and controlled, there was an urgency in his voice. We need to flee, he said plainly. We gather the things we need in secret, and we ready the long ships. We're going tonight. He allowed a moment for the full weight of what he said to sink in among they who listened intently. We fly north then, Fitbjorn said, away from the whims of a foreign rule. He cracked his knuckles now. I am ready. He lifted his father's axe and rested it over his shoulder. Good man! I shall need the strength of your axe, and your sword, and your arm. All of you I will need. You have today to get together the things we shall need for the sailing. For tonight I have a plan that I shall need a dozen of you to help me with. We shall be thieves in the darkness. He smiled as the Varangians started to gather around him. The bank stores again? Asked Harold. No. Well, yes, of course, those. We'll take those with us. There is something else we need to steal, though. That shall be done in the night. I plan on leaving by the cover of darkness. Go and tell whoever would come with me, and know that you who'd stay are welcome to. I'll not force any from this place unless I need to for a crew. Who here is with me? At this, there was an outpouring of voices. Quiet then, quiet then. Many of you, enough I should think. There is a place upon the long ships for you, but we must move fast, and we must have the greatest quiet secretness as we do. Go tell any. Don't tell any but other Varangian. He breathed loudly. Why can it never be a simple thing? I asked the gods why they led me through rough sea, Niels said. They responded. Because your enemies cannot swim. Harold smiled. Blasphemous heathen, he said with a smirk. Until death, Niels replied loudly, getting close to Harold and locking eyes with him. All right. So long as all of you are like this in your hearts, then we shall be enough to get the work done, to free from the city tonight. Harold left then. He turned in a swift motion and made for the door, leaving in a bluster. Those in the barracks stood watching the door, stayed in suddenness of the declaration. I'm sure he has much to get done today. Do you think we'll actually have to flee? Asked Olaf. No, it will likely be changed by nightfall. Fitbjorn sighed. That said, we should prepare for it to happen. Anything could happen in this place. They spent much of the day gathering together the materials they'd need for the voyage, hoping the entire time they wouldn't need it. Among the material taken and stored into the cargo was a barrel of the fine mead Helgi and Dorvind made. The store of wealth was the most challenging to take from. They had, of course, leave of the commander to enter and made sure only to secret out the grandest of valuables. With this, there was also food and water to be tied in. Once that was done, the least of the necessities were met, and they could conceivably leave. As Harold had ordered, they were also to discreetly tell the Varangian within the city that the commander was leaving, and he'd take any who wished to leave with him. Some were excited by the idea and asked to join. Others said they'd rather stay and keep fighting in Miklagard. One man said Harold could go fuck himself, to which Fitbjorn laughed heartily and clapped him on the back. Night fell. They all met with their commander back at the barracks. Fortunately, They didn't have to enter or gather secretly, as this place was always full of Nordic warriors. They waited for midnight, as others came and gathered with them, ready to go. Bodil had a wooden board of food set on her lap, and she ate with her friends. Others would at time asked to poke through the fare, and she always welcomed them to enjoy something. The gathered crew was made up of many. Fitbjorn and all his friends, Helgi the Brewess, and two of the beautiful serving women from the long sail, the two burly doormen from the long sail. Excuse me. Several of the local Byzantine warriors who'd been swayed to join with Harold's ship, and many Varangian who supported Harold or wished to return with him. This is well. You are all good and brave warriors, or beautiful women, which is nearly as useful and twice as good. I will need the most of you to go to the harbor now. You are to prepare the ships for launch and be ready to cut down any guard who might try and stop us. I know not if this will happen, but be ready. Right now, you. I'll need a dozen or so to come with me. You go on a last mission here to the past. He grinned. There is one last cargo we have to collect, and I'll need you to help protect and escort her. Now go! This night brings with it a heaviness. He turned and looked up at the full moon and breathed in the warm night air. Mark the scent and warmth well, friends. Too soon we'll not have it at our brows anymore. Now go! Fitbjorn went to the harbor from there. His previous thoughts about the veracity of Harold's claims dashed, as it seemed he truly intended to escape the city. In the night, the docks were all sparsely occupied, if at all, and thus it was an easy thing for the horde to approach and start to ready the ships. Still, they kept their eyes on any who might be out to ask a question of them, ready with dumb language the guards wouldn't understand, and ready with blades. The harbors were so lax in their patrol for the ever-present chain of Constantinople, the famous protective chain that was spanned the Golden Sound and stopped enemy vessels from entering. None knew if Harold had a way of destroying the chain or making certain it was lowered, but regardless, they worked to make the ship ready. There's a guard, Bodil said. Fitbjorn stood from where he'd been bent in the ship tying something. He's coming here. Does anyone know Greek? Harold asked. I know a little, Niels said. Hail! He walked forth and met with the man. They started to talk. Yasu haltedly between them, and the guard was looking to the ships being made ready. Niels was pointing and using much hand sign to discuss. Anyone have a bow handy? Asked Ragnar in a hushed tone. No, but my sword would kill cleaner. Havvald replied as quiet. Maybe Niels can satisfy the question, Inga said. Be calm, lover. He turned to her and wrapped an arm around her waist. Not my talent, but I'll try. I think he wants to talk to the commander, Niels said back. Then I am the commander, Fitbjorn said, standing tall, and walked to them. He untied a bag of numisma from his belt and handed the silver to the guard. He asks what this is for, Niels translated. Tell him it is to buy his place as guard here tonight. I am a Varangian guard, and I want his duty. The man drew closer to inspect the money. Fitbjorn then stabbed him swiftly in the neck and tripped him to fall sideways. He landed on him, driving the scream from his lungs and holding him under his weight until he died. Keep backing the ships, he ordered. The guard's last sputtering of life gurgled out, and Fitbjorn dragged him to the water. Unceremoniously, he kicked him down the slope and let him tumble into the waves. Hail, Raider! You are ace, Ragnar said. I think I have finished with this place. He stood tall. I am ready to go. They heard a commotion beyond the gate and all saw a group of their own running to the ships. The time to get ready, the commander has come, Havvald said. The ships were prepared, and so they stood in a group and watched the arriving commander and his Varangian. There was also a large Roman guard among them, not after them, but quite clearly running with them. What was it he needed from the palace? What do you think he wanted? Asked Bodil. A woman. He said she when talking about her. I think he went to get the woman he'd been staying with in the palace. It's love, I think, Inga said with a smile. There is a warm heart in the man. Why is she over his shoulder? Asked Ragnar. That's a strange way for one's love to be. And more the ships! We launch now! Harold yelled. A shout came from behind the running men, and they on the dock could see that their weapons were out. What the hell? Bodil asked. What's the commotion for a whore? Uh, I. That's not a whore, Niels said as Harold approached. He then ran past their bewildered selves and leapt onto the boat. All could see the woman was gagged and her hands were tied behind her back. Oh, gods, it's worse. Everyone looked to Harold, standing in the ship and settling the woman against the mast. She was indeed wearing fine robes and had jewels adorning her fingers. The woman had a cloth wrapped through her mouth as a gag, and tears streaked black paint down her face. It's the Empress's niece. Everyone turned to Niels, shock-faced. It is time to leave, Harold bellowed again, and they all roused to action. Harold then spoke something in Greek to the woman, clearly trying to calm her. Tears continued to stream down her face, and she shivered in paralyzed fear. The city guard who'd run with Harold was the large Stephanos, he who'd been tasked with arresting him. Everyone knew them to be friends, and now that was well founded as the man leapt on board and laughed as he clasped hands with Harold. He spoke something in Greek to the man, and he responded and patted his shoulder. Then Harold turned to the shore. Hear that? Harold shouted. They're coming! Get those boats in the water now! Heave! The longships were launched then, 2 of them. The Norse warriors only took 2 of the ships, as they didn't want to deprive the staying Varangian of the vessels they'd need to carry out the Empire's work. All they on board pushed away from the dock, while some stayed on the wooden planking and push-walked the ship to make its way easier. The ships left the dock. The Nordic warriors and those that decided to come with them left Miklagard. For a moment, the calm of the water seemed to conflict with the wild fury of their haste and urgency. Oars! Harold ordered, running to the prow and hanging off it to watch the harbor drift away. The oars were taken out by the practiced Varangian, and they put them down to bite into the water. Steady, he called, watching for all to be in place and prepared. Heave, he called. The other ships pulled from the dock as well, this one led by Sven, who was himself a well-practiced navigator. The ship's oars were brought out by the command, and they started to row. To the west, called Eric, who thought to command as navigator. No, we go to the east now. My side, pull hard and turn us east. Harold stood at the prow on the left side of the ship, where Eric stood on the right. East. But my lord, the chain, worry not this. Trust in me and row. Fitbjorn had missed the great power he felt when rowing. It was so great a thing to have this water swell and rip under his influence as he pulled the oar time and again. On the harbor's shore, there came an ever-growing number of Roman soldiers and guards who'd come to catch them, their frustration plain in their bearing as they shouted and looked for a vessel to follow after them. Did we kidnap the Empress's fucking daughter? Asked Bodil, rowing as avidly as any. Niece, Niels replied. Not quite a daughter, but a mighty prize no matter. Heave! Asked Ragnar. She's a Christian woman. This treatment is unsuited to such as she. Oh, shut up, Inga said loudly, shocking everyone. She's a means to our escape, and I'd like you to be stilled in your speech about it. Question or no, it's not our place to question. Now row, you fucking Christ-licker, or I'll throw you off my goddamn self. By Asgard's mighty hall, Hafald said. I want to fuck you right now, woman. Later, warrior. We have to get to the hell out of Miklagard first. Harold, really just quit Miklagard with a hostage. This is madness. Madness or not? We're with him now, Fitbjorn said. Again, my fate is to follow along with that man. Aye, it seems ours to follow along with you, White Bear, Bodil said. You had better never lead us astray, or I'll find you in Valhalla myself, and we'll have a combat in the courtyard. Heave, you dogs! Harold yelled. They put the oars to the water and rocked back, pulling with all their might against the black night sea, the scent of salt spray rising all about them as they felt themselves starting to sweat, soon with the exertion of the pull. Careful! Ease upon my right side. Now strong! Good! You! Go! Harold said carefully, guiding the long ship with a very specific direction. Lord, the chain is not down, a navigator said near the front. No, Eric, it is not. There's no way they will lower the chain for us, Harold. Stephanos said to him in Greek. No, the chain won't lower for us, so we'll have to fly. Harold responded. I have always been curious if this would work. He then jumped from the high place at the prow and hurried through the rowing sailors. You, and you! Carry these heavy things. Hathald, you have the strength enough to pick up that barrel. Take it and go for the back. You, and you as well. And you! Grab something heavy, and all of you go to the back. Not you. I need you to keep rowing. You, yes, you, keep rowing too. Go, go! All of you now. Do as you're instructed. Come on! Harold took the royal niece and threw her over his shoulder again. All the command went to the back, with some burden carried. No one knew what he was doing, but Fitbjorn noticed that it was the heaviest he ordered to go back and left the lighter warriors, especially the women, rowing. Then he started to get an idea of what was happening. You have to be joking, he said. He looked to the front of the ship, but he realized it all at once. Go on! To the back! Hang off the dragon if you have to! Fitbjorn shouted and picked up a heavy chest of numismamani. As the warriors came to the back, Harold started to yell for the other ship to follow the same instruction. Sven, for his part, didn't hesitate a moment and did exactly as Harold ordered. The bow of both ships lifted some as the back dipped deeper into the water. Lord, said Olas, seeing the water lap closer to the railing at the back. Keep forward! Oars, you pull with all of your strength. Heave! Fitbjorn looked ahead, trying to make out the murky darkness into a view, and then he saw it. The great chain of Miklagard that was strung across the Golden Sound, 500 meters from one end to the other. Heave now! Now we see if these ships can fly. They on the oars pulled for all their life. Everyone at the back saw the approaching chain and absurdly saw that this might work. The chain dipped so low in the middle of the sound that it skimmed the water. The chain looked like a long and stable serpent. Regardless of the dip and the boat's rise, it still looked like they were about to wreck against the chain of Constantinople. Come, you keel, brace your strength and take the chain, for we fly hence, Harold said. Everyone on board held their breath, and closer and closer they came to the moment of contact, his great fear being that instead of sliding over the chain, would push up and catch in front of the ship. Come on, Harold said through clenched teeth. As fast as they were going, anything but total success would be a complete disaster. The keel of the ship then struck the chain, and the links bowed away from it. And then, with an unearthly scraping noise, the front of the ship climbed up and started to push its way over the chain of Constantinople. To the front! All of you! Keep rowing! At his words, the gathered warriors released their breath and ran forth, carefully making their way to the front to load the weight there. In the going, Fitbjorn looked at the links as he passed over them and was aware then that he stood on a ship that was somewhat suspended out of the water by no more than this enormous metal chain. The front of the ship crashed hard into the water when the weight was properly distributed, and the rest of it slid down off the chain by the keel. The wooden sides of the ship were also scraped raw by the metal, and many heard the mighty cracking it had caused, but the ship floated there quietly on the other side of the chain. I did it. My ship can fly, Harold shouted in glorious triumph. He then turned and looked back. One more to come. Have those oars. Heave those oars, he shouted. The other ship, seeing Harold's great accomplishment, rode for the chain and readied to do the same as he'd done. There was some sway in the chain now, as was unavoidable, and the other ship met keel to metal. Hold! Harold called. We must be sure that they've made it. The second galley lifted from the water and rode up onto the chain, but all could see the struggle going on here. Row! Sven shouted. Push! His efforts, though, were for naught, as the ship then loudly cracked, a guttural and fatal sound, the wild shriek of death that only their galley could utter, and only these people in the world ever heard it. Row us back! Row us back! Fitbjorn shouted. They're going to make it! Row us back! Do as he says! God damn it! Harold shouted. The other ship was stuck on the links. The ship had very little momentum to it, and thus, once every standing sailor went to an available oar and the heave was called, they all drifted back to the other ship with ease. Get aboard all the money, Harold ordered. Those chests and that barrel, is that water? Good, hand it here. Pass back that wrap of silks. I know. We won't be able to, we won't absolutely need it. Just pass it back. We should have enough space for half again this crew, so everyone listen up! The long ship was starting to take on water as the cracks slowly deepened. There's little time and we need to get gone. You, who have second thoughts about coming with me, now should stay. We don't have room for everyone. If you return to shore, no, you should be able to assemble back into the guards without punishment. It's me she wanted. If you stay, we make for the court of Yaroslav, and you will be my gilded brethren, my golden warriors. But you have only now to decide. We are with you, Lord. Hail, Lord Harold. He shook his head with a smile. I thought such. We cannot take everyone, and we don't have time. You who stay, know that you'll be able to come and meet me after this. I need your bravery now. Those who stay and come after, I'll give you a weregild as you come. Who will stay? This offer immediately swayed more minds. I'll stay. As shall I. Aye. There's a woman here I love anyway. You were going to leave a woman you loved, Inga shouted, affronted. Halfeld laughed and put an arm around her. I will stay too. And I. Fitbjorn looked to Bodil. She shook her head in determined defiance. He looked to Ragnar, who did the same. Halfeld and Inga and Harold and Olaf and Niels all mentioned that they were staying on this boat. There was a transfer from the sinking ship to the still floating one. They who'd elected to stay in Miklagard jumped over or right into the warm waters, while they who wished to come swung on to Harold's galley. They threw across what materials they'd need and left what they would not until the longship was floating low, laden as it was with the added weight. Right. That looks like enough. Will no one else stay? I will, Sven said. All aboard the ship looked over at the prow of the sinking vessel. There he stood. This was my charge, and here I have broken the ship in two. He stood with a hand on the dragon head and was dipping down, his feet upon the railing almost wetted in the sound. Going down with the ship? Asked Harold. So eager are you for honor? Sven laughed. I have honor enough in the bounding. That is why I can't leave. I'll be here until the end, and then I'll swim to the shore. Then God be with you, friend. I hope to see you again one day. The Roman ships are coming, Lord. You had better go. Harold breathed in deep and sighed loudly. To the oars! He snapped, and everyone jumped to a seat. Heave! Harold and his men pulled the ship away from the sinking galley, the chain, and Constantinople. End of chapter 19. And end of part 1. Part 2 shall come next. So yeah, that's another one of my favorites. Apparently that's a true freaking story. Can you imagine that? How amazing. A true story. The Great Chain of Constantinople. And Harold Sigurdsson bunny hopped it. What? Amazing. Oftentimes when I talk about Harold Sigurdsson to people that I know, talking about this book that I've written, I tell them that the saga of Harold, he reads like a Viking Jack Sparrow. And it's stuff like this that makes me say so. It's absolutely incredible. So thank you for joining and partaking and listening. And hail. Here's to jumping the chain, my friends. And in case you were curious, the entire time I've been drinking very good mead that I myself brewed. It's fantastic.